out if our next panel can come up. Actually, Ms. Mary Lansky, who's been working over her career at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab in various roles in IT and business continuity. In fact, their office supported us when we were first initiated in 2011, and we did a tabletop exercise and workshop with the National Defense University at Fort McNair, Washington, where we looked at an extreme high-impact case and a low-impact case of EMP. We did the mid-level EMP case at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and Mary was instrumental in organizing that effort for her. And what I'd like to do is have her come up and introduce her panel. She's been working tirelessly for the last couple of years, working with us on a weekly phone call. In addition to our organizing call we do on Friday, they actually have a Thursday call that works on these publications. And this year she's done like a substantial amount of work to be able to provide sort of a breakthrough book. I'd like her to discuss what that book is, and then have the others who are participating with her on this in the workshop that we did yesterday at the National Guard Association of the U.S. Headquarters about our next steps and how you might be able to participate with them in this coming year.
Thank you, Chuck. Could I have Steve Gallant and Roger Kovas? I don't see them, but Fred and Bill, would you please come up? We'll take it in the order that we get it. I would like to first start this off by saying something about Y2K. I heard this yesterday, and I heard it again today, that, it was wonderful when December the 31st happened, and then we rolled into January 1, 2000, that nothing bad happened. And it was known as Y2K. That nothing bad happened because we as a nation took a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of publicity about what could happen, and we hired lots of people to go and work the situation. So we as a country thought it was very important. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we as a nation could take this issue of an EMP and take it as being so serious that if it happened, nothing would go on the next day. Wouldn't that be a great goal to have for this? So I think when we mention Y2K, we have to realize how much work really went into it. So let me go to 2015. What happened in 2015 was that we had a workshop and we kicked off some ideas about how to be protected if there was a long-term outage of the grid. So we looked at long-term outage as being weeks, months, or even a year. And then we said that it's widespread. So that it meant that it wasn't just localized, but it could be all of nation. So we said that this was really important, and we started working on this. And you have seen that we presented the book, Powering Through. You can get this out at the front desk. And we are really very excited that we've had such great endorsements. One of the endorsements from Ted Koppel, who had just said how bad things would be in cyber, says, powering through is a gigantic step in the right direction. So we're very excited about that. This book wouldn't have happened except that we had 26 authors. And we had a great number of people who were on the weekly phone calls, conference calls. And what we did in writing the book was that somebody would write a section, it was sent out to the list of people, and then that week we would have, or the next week we would have a review of that. So each author stood a review of many people on those conference calls talking about what they've done, and we would refine it and have new versions of it. So that was exciting. I want to say thank you to Chuck Mancho because he gave us the confidence of letting us go off and do this basically on our own without a lot of his involvement. And he would check in every once in a while to be sure that we hadn't gone completely rogue. So a big thank you to Chuck for your support and your encouragement on all of this. I would like to thank also Steve Valant and Bill Harris because they have been, the book wouldn't have been possible without our work. The book discusses the grid and what happens with the grid. It also discusses some of the, as Scott Bjork said, some of the documentation nationally. And then it goes into threats. And we talk about 5 different threats. We talk about EMP, solar storm. We talk about cyber, physical attacks, and then radio frequency weapons. So all the 5. And in the front of the book, in red, is the consequences of those 5 different threats. And this is the George Baker chart, and all of that is explained in the book. And we look at severe kind of threats to the grid, and then not so severe threats to the grid. But if we're prepared for the severe, we will be prepared for whatever comes along. The book looks at interdependencies of what we are going to look at, and it looks at some of the critical infrastructure. One of the things that we found along the way was water was so important that water had to be, is really critical. If we keep our water going, then in our cities we can keep people at home and we can keep our wastewater running also. It's extremely important. So it's very definitely talked about in the book. Another important, I think, new thrust in the book was resilient community islands. And a resilient community island can be your community, it could be a university or college campus, it could be a hospital complex, it could be a business park. So there were, and a faith organization, so we came up with many different ways that we could have resilient community islands. Chapter 8 in the book actually talks about what if this were to happen, what would we do? We look at the whole of community, starting with citizens up through the government, looking at cities and rural, looking at businesses, looking at nonprofit organizations, so really the whole community. So we published a book, here it is, and that's exciting. And as we started thinking about it, it was a situation where we would say, oh my goodness, we wish we had had more in this topic or more in that topic. And so we said, well, this is just volume 1. We've got to move to volume 2. So yesterday we had a workshop on this. And so I would like to introduce the team of people. And I don't know where Ron Jacobus is. So Bob, can you go find him? Bill Harris led a team looking at alternative resilience strategies. Steve Valant looked at resilient community islands. Ron Jacobus looked at the government focus, and Fred Farrar looked at critical infrastructure. So would each one of you, Bill, would you start and talk about some of the results of what happened in your breakout session?
Thank you, Mary. So we looked at the types of modeling, the methods that could be used to improve our understanding of the interrelationships among these critical infrastructures, the consequence management choices, and how that feeds back into priorities for investing to protect critical infrastructure. So the first, we looked at the conventional system is to have reliability standards for any particular infrastructure supplemented by best practices. Now, even there's some important infrastructures that don't have reliability standards, such as the interstate gas pipeline. No one's responsible for reliability, so you can put in an all-electric compressor, which will compound the power outages we found in Texas in 2011 and in California and Arizona in 2014. So we know that's insufficient. Then we looked at modeling interrelationships between pairs of critical infrastructure, the water-electric interface. But even for agriculture, if you look at a pair, it doesn't work because you have to look at water, electric, and chemicals. And then you have to transport it. So we looked at it, we were especially impressed by the modeling opportunities that Encosi is doing and that others of us can participate with to do system-based, model-based system engineering, which can begin to, first to document what the infrastructures are now, what are some of the relationships, including invisible critical interdependencies, and the synergies as you fix one, what are the benefits for another. We reviewed, we don't think there's a preferred method. We think all the different techniques that we've utilized are worth doing, but we did come up with some conclusions yesterday afternoon about where we think version 2.0 of the book should concentrate for improvements. We wanted to improve what we knew about the electric grid and its relationship to other energy sectors. There's been work at the EIS Council, 2 books edited by Paul Stockman that look at fuel and water. So the energy sector. We are weak on communications in this version. We know that many communication systems being out will cause deterioration of all the other resiliencies and recovery opportunities. So that's the second area. We still want to understand better the water and wastewater systems. And we knew, when I left, transportation as well. But we then found that there were other critical needs that weren't an entire infrastructure. The positioning and timing system from the GPS system are vital to basically all the critical infrastructure. And we probably need a land-based backup of the GPS system, or some combination of that and better EMP protected. It's more the ground stations than the satellites. Some of the satellites already have some protection, but the ground stations are vulnerable. So we thought that was important, and then we also recognized that there was a special role for the National Guard. The National Guard already has taken a lead in cyber protection. They are being increasingly trained to come in to protect against cyber attacks. But there are so many other sectors where they could make a big difference. We talked briefly about the food distribution system. That it will be vital. Of that, I forgot to mention the agricultural section. We were especially weak on agriculture and the food supply chain. We found in version 1, and we were surprised to find, that we had gone from a system that not only had MRE rations for military personnel, but we had a system of rations in public storage for civilians. From 2000, we've had it from before World War II, but we've had it especially 2004 through 2008 with concerns about anthrax attack. We had warehouses that would provide a real cushion in the event the grid was lost. The EMP Commission reported in April 2008 that we needed to have stocks of food supplies because we would lose at least one growing season after an EMP attack and maybe more. And our ports have become, they used to have diesel fuel. Almost all the cranes are now all electric. Partly, again, we have several situations where air quality decisions drive us to greater vulnerability. The ports, one, the all-electric compressors on gas pipelines, another. So we found that in 2008, we went from a plan to a framework for emergency agricultural supplies. A plan you have to implement. A framework you can pretty much do what you want. So that then led to So that the last year of the Bush administration, we had that change. And in 2009 and 10, the first 2 years of the Obama administration, we had moved to 15 regional supply systems for emergency food stocks, and those food stocks were distributed and not replaced. So we're down to about 10 days in the supermarket supply chain system, and another 10 days, at most 2 weeks, for agriculture, which means we don't have, we can't fulfill the goal to have shelter in place in large urban areas that have over half our population. So that was another sector. If we can generate some money from the book and possibly from other financial grants or partnerships, we want to have some workshops. We want to go back to California on the food supply system. We also, we know we do not have much for financial system resilience, but we did reach a tentative conclusion that we might be able to utilize the next generation of smartphones as a base capability to recover financial transactions and contracting. The older smartphones that were available in 2007 were EMP tested by the old EMP Commission, and if they weren't plugged into wall outlets, they almost all worked. But the cell tower, the entire communication system would burn out in an EMP attack. So one possibility is to work with the Silicon Valley designers of the next generation of smartphones. Make the phones a little better EMP protected, but also then work with the telecommunications industry to identify places. Ross Merlin yesterday suggested the Postal Service to have a place in each community. Everyone knows where that a post office is. Or to have the banks in a community have at least one place where you could bring your phone and be able to communicate with protected networks through the data centers that are protected. So that's not going to happen immediately. But if we could recover a financial system, so we are not into a barter economy, it should immensely improve the rate of recovery. It's just a much more efficient economy if we have the market allocating scarce resources. And you can't do that without financial transactions. And then the last things that we considered important were, I mentioned the National Guard, but more generally having the Department of Defense take some responsibility for providing standards and support for the civilian infrastructures. Back in 1966, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Castro would not agree to limit missiles, and there was an issue of whether utilities in Florida should have a responsibility to protect against missile attacks on electric utilities, especially the nuclear power plants. The predecessor to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission adopted an enemy of the state doctrine that basically said that if there's a state threat that is not the responsibility of the utilities to defend against it, that has the perverse effect of making it more expensive. If you don't design protection of your control center, the cost now soars from 3 to 5% to maybe 20%. So we need to bring the Defense Department back, and so for our book, we find basically some priorities that we want to work on. Thank you.
Okay, I'm up next. So we had our breakout session involved resilient communities. And the benefit of when you think about this problem from a community perspective, from an outside a community perspective, it's overwhelming, complicated. Where do you start? If you put it in terms of the community becomes the focal point of the infrastructures and the points of sustainability and resilience that come together to support that exact community. So that's a very generic idea. What is a community? Every community is different. So how can we standardize this conversation in a way so that we can compare our unique communities or our unique organizations, which can be looked at as a community, against a standard set of ideas that help you instantiate sustainability and resilience. The difference between sustainability and resilience is sustainability is how much food do you have, how much water do you have, spare parts, do you have people coming to work, do you have fuel. Resilience is protection oriented. It's in the security aspects. So are your systems EMP protected? Are they cyber protected? Are they protected against physical attack? So those are the aspects that we snap into the community concept. In our breakout sessions, we talked about coming up with some standardized models on different community types, just to use as examples in order to be accelerators for planners or for people to get their head around this idea. So examples of a sustainable community model or template that we could document would include hospitals, perhaps a small rural town, university campus, military bases, and so on. There's a spectrum of community that ranges from, on one end, very rural, perhaps even the Amish, who don't need electricity and they do everything in-house. And then the far end of that spectrum would be a manufacturing facility inside a very large metropolitan area that is reliant on global supply chains. So communities can run the entire spectrum. It's easier to model the simpler ones that I started with. So that's a good place to start. We can look at each of these community sets as almost like Lego blocks. In a way, our current infrastructure is all interrelated and interconnected. And it's not segmented, and therein lies our dilemma. We can take our infrastructure down from single points of failure. If we're segmented, similarly to inside a ship with watertight compartments, you can seal off the damage zone and other parts still work. So the concept is, let's get some resilient communities established. We don't have to be built from scratch. We can overlay and retrofit resilience and sustainability into some communities that we have today. It's gaining an understanding of what would be good starting points. Would it be a city block? Would it be a rural agricultural community? Would it be the zones that surround critical manufacturing? Identify how sustainable these communities are. Can they last a year without resupply? They can't. So it's how far can they last? Take inventory. There's a process to this. Take inventory of their capabilities today. Compare that to their ability to be a resilient island or an island that requires interconnections with other islands of resilience. Understand those gaps in sustainability and resilience, and let's go ahead and close those gaps. I'm just keeping it brief, but we need to recreate the buffer that used to exist in the United States when we had lots of family farms, lots of local production. We've become a just-in-time global economy, and that has become our Achilles heel. We can resegment and create more local communities that are microgridded and can power themselves and produce more power and food and water than they consume. We get enough of those clustered around dense metropolitan areas, we've got a great spot.
I think I was going to go last, right?
I'll let you go. I got that. You go.
All right, I'll go next. I don't have any time, so that concludes my presentation. Mary, I'm going to go ahead and do what you're going to say. 2 to 3 minutes max. Okay. Myself and Steve Pappas led the largest group that met yesterday. Steve's in the back. Hey, Steve. And who all here was in the workshop? We had about 30 to 40 folks. So looking at the private sector, we all know all of this is meaningless. We can talk about congressional activity. We can talk about DHS, FBI. We need the private sector, the owners and the operators of all of this critical infrastructure, right? So a lot of our discussion yesterday talked about what we need to do for version 2 is to involve the experts from the private sector who can really flesh out what it is we need to do, what we need to say. Critical to that is what is our message? What is our message? In developing a communication strategy, who are we talking to? Who are we trying to get involved? who are we trying to educate? So we need to think through those things. We went from communication and audience to talking about some of those people who we'd like to involve in version 2.0, and that would be using some of our existing resources in InfraGard, such as the sector chiefs, to pull those experts in closer to us. Also, in my opinion, we need to be working, in the group's opinion, we need to be working much more closely with DHS and PSAs. If we don't know who our PSAs are, and if we're not tied to the hip with them, we're failing in what we need to do, because they're the ones that really committed to pushing this forward. So involvement with the DHS, PSAs, sector chiefs, trade associations, not-for-profits, and one of the big ones, and what I hope we really sort of flesh out here in version 2, is faith-based organizations and communities, right? Some of those like the Mormon Church that does a lot of preparedness and resilience and security. The Red Cross, a not-for-profit. So we need to involve those faith-based organizations as part of this resilience solution, this puzzle, maybe the creation of the islands as we move forward. And that is it. 2 minutes. All right.
I've got the government domain, so I don't know if I can do a 2 and 3 minute one. We had a very spirited and lively debate during our breakout session. And I would like to liken it to trying to put a man on the moon in about an hour and a half. If the government domain, I would say, with respect to the other breakout sessions, maybe perhaps the most difficult domain area to flesh out. As Roscoe Bartlett and Peter Pry mentioned, they brought this forth to Congress back in 1997, and today there's been no federal legislation. So we need to start looking at what we're doing, how we've done in the past. Is it working as it worked? Do we need to change some of the strategies? What strategies do those need to be? To use the Texas model, you can drink a horse water, but you can't make it drink. People are going to do what they only feel that they're incentivized to do. So when we talk about the government domain, we look at elected officials, getting nonprofits to act as a buffer between constituencies and the elected officials, to educate the elected officials and the public to say this is something that needs to be done. And once you have, a general public that is staunch on the issue as a whole, you tend to see government acting as a response. And so getting government to move on something takes every level of government, especially in this scenario of high-impact threats and protection from state, local to federal. In order to row the boat, they all have to be rowing the oars in the same direction. So that's kind of what we got to, and we need to figure out exactly how to do that in 2.0 and how to get over the hurdles that we have had in the past. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, each one of you, very much for